Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and today we're going to learn how to do some general maintenance on your paintball markers. Okay, so we're looking at a 98 Custom right now. This is a 98 Custom Platinum Series ACT, so one of the newest versions of the 98 Custom. It is a standard mechanical version. It does not have any electronics in it or any response trigger in it. If you have an older model of the 98 Custom, some of the stuff that we talk about might not pertain to you or make sense, but the generic maintenance parts of what we're going to look at will be the same still. We will talk about the features that you'll see in here because it is an ACT. Just disregard it if you don't have that version. All right, so whenever we want to start working on a gun, obviously we want to make sure that we are safe first. So the gun is degassed, no tank on it, no air inside of there. So we've got the tank off. We're going to cock it back. We're going to pull the trigger, make sure it shoots with no without expelling any gas inside there. It's a good way to figure out if the gun has residual gas left in it. So we want to do that, and then we're going to remove anything that is superfluous that we're not going to be looking at. We don't need the barrel. We're not going to do any maintenance on that. Feed neck, might do some cleaning on that, but you're not going to oil your feed neck or anything. So we're going to take that off as well. So we're going to remove both shell pieces, or both halves of the Platinum series here. It comes in the back and the front half. If you have an older model, this all comes off as one unit, but with this one, it comes off in two pieces. So we're going to take those off, a 1/8 Allen. We're just going to unscrew all these pieces. For the most part, I usually do not remove the screws completely out if possible. Sometimes you have to. What it does is it kind of just keeps all the screws in one spot. That way I don't lose them. You never like to put something back together and then realize that you've got leftover pieces. All right, so everything's loosened up. We're going to take off the back half first. There's a couple things you want to do when you take off the halves, and if you're doing this with a complete gun, just follow the same thing. If you just grab the half and lift it up and yank, a couple things are going to happen. The spring, which is under tension back here with the back cap, is probably going to lift and shoot out. You might lose it. The spring assembly that is on the Sear might pop out and you'll lose it. So you just want to be careful that you're not losing pieces. Trigger return spring, all those things. We don't want to lose them. So we're going to slowly kind of wiggle everything and get it up. If you look at the back side right here, as I'm moving this, you can already see the back plug has lifted up and is trying to get out. I want to make sure that that stays down so that I don't have my springs and everything popping out of there. So I'm going to still kind of work this up, and I should be able to just lift it right out, just like that. You can see that my screws are still in there. I'm just going to set it off to the side, like that. Now inside here, we've got a couple different springs. We've got our trigger guard, we can move that out of the way. Our safety, we can move that out of the way. We have our trigger return spring right here, our Sear Spring right here, our main drive spring here, our ACT spring right here. The ACT spring stands for anti-chop technology. We'll show you how that works in a minute. And that's pretty much it as far as springy do's in the front right there. So let's get the front off as well. Again, we're just going to kind of wiggle it. On these Platinum Series guns, sometimes if this is super, super tight, this fitting, your gas line fitting that goes up into the valve, it will keep this from wanting to come apart. Just loosen it up a little bit, and you should be able to pop it right off. And then sometimes the foregrip will come with it. Sometimes it doesn't. In older model guns, older 98s that aren't the Platinum Series, this piece up here, this is the latch for the feet neck. It's on a spring that kind of looks like a horseshoe, and it sits underneath here. Without this rail on the top here, which is now how the Platinum Series comes, it encloses this spring and this latch, and it keeps them from popping out. They used to come out all the time, and they were a pain to have to try to hold in place and get the bodies together, but you don't have to worry about that anymore. So unless you're looking to fight this thing, just leave that alone. There should be no reason that you need to take it out unless it's just covered in goo. Then you have a different problem. You need to remove these screws along the top side here, pull this off, and then you can get to this piece. But unless it's dirty, there's never any reason to get inside of there. But that's probably why you're watching this video, because you got dirt or maintenance that you need to do. So we're going to look at, well, we're going to pull this whole thing apart real quick. This down here, this hose, let me start with the hose. The hose is held in place by a compression fitting on both ends. So they are not Loctited, they are not Tefloned, they are just married together through force, basically, and it seals everything up inside of there. So if you were to take this apart, like we will in just a minute, you do not need to re-seal it in any way. You just need to screw it together properly, and it will be airtight. Let's take out the Sear Spring. Obviously, we just want to be careful that we don't lose it. So the Sear Spring should pop out. The sear itself will pop out, and it moving back and forth, like you see right here, that is normal. It's supposed to do that. The newer models have this larger housing on them that you can see right here. Older models just have a dowel pin that runs through the middle. So regardless of which one you have, they both work the same. Then you can see we've got a couple more trigger pins right here, as well as a trigger return spring. And they are a different size, and they're a different color. Short one goes for the trigger return, longer one goes for the Sear Spring. Then you can actually take your trigger out as well. And again, the only reason you would need to take your trigger out is if it was dirty and you wanted to clean it up. Or if when you removed the half of your body off, it all came apart, which can happen as well. So you'll need to know how to put it back together. These 4 pins are the same. You just drop them in there. The trigger just slides over the pins like that. This is meant to be super loose on there. That pin does not fill the hole completely. This back one does, and these two are just guides for the sear when it is in place right there. It limits the travel of the sear up and down. I don't know if you guys can see that on there. Yeah, you can. Right there. All right, so let's take that out. Maintenance. First thing we're going to do with this setup is remove the hammer, the back cap, springs, bolt, linkage arm, and we're going to leave the power tube in there for now. And then that power tube has the valve inside of it. So we can kind of just wiggle that up, slide these 2 pieces out like that. You can see my my detent, anti-ball, yeah, same thing, anti-ball reverse or anti-ball double feeder, whatever you want to call it. It's a detent. It popped out of there. We'll talk about that when we go to put it back in. Pull out, that's our caulking handle, our hammer, linkage arm, and bolt. Now from this position right here, if everything was still tight, this would not want to come out of here. And I've loosened it up a little bit. And we can see we spin this down right here. So that would be tightening it down. Going the other direction would be loosening it up. And you can see the front right here. You see this little fitting. This is a compression fitting right here. It fits perfectly around this fitting. And when you put them together and then tighten it down by putting this into the body, like so, and then tightening this by spinning it, see how it rotates around independent of the hose, it will control the length of the front, pushing it into this fitting and sealing everything up inside. So by pushing it up against that that flange inside there, you get a good quality seal. No air is going to come out of there. So it's a very simple design, so you're not required to Teflon or Loctite or anything like that anymore, which is great. So you can pull that off of there. There's not really much, again, to maintenance on these. You can just, if it's dirty, clean it, wipe it down. Same kind of fitting goes into there. You just tighten this against it, and it compresses and seals properly. If, for some reason, you have changed these 2 fittings over, I think you can see them inside there. These are your air ports for your response trigger and your cyclone feed. If for some reason you have a leak coming out of these 2 over here or in this area, on the inside you can see right here is an O-ring right there. And it just basically fills the gap where the air would come out of the power tube. So that hole fits right around that O-ring right there, or fits inside of that O-ring, so that when air does come through or out of it, every time the gun is shot, it is trapped inside that area and would either be expelled through those ports or just doesn't go anywhere and sits there. So if you have a leakage or a leak through this side over here, that would be the culprit. Or if you have bad compression, like you're shooting your gun and not enough air is coming through there, check this O-ring to make sure that it is controlling and trapping that gas and forcing it through those expansion slots. Okay, so power tube out. Inside the power tube is your valve. Now, unlike some of the other guns like the A5, X7, the old X7, not the Phenom, the power tube, or I'm going to say the valve inside the power tube, is not rebuildable, or it's not meant to be rebuilt in these guns. There is a very, very tricky snap ring that sits inside here around the edge, and it's very hard to get out, very hard to put back in, so they're not really intending it to be rebuilt. If you have a valve problem, you can buy these complete. You just pop a new one in if you have a valve leak. But there is one O-ring around the front right here. This seals the valve inside the power tube. So if you have a leak through there, check that O-ring on the front. A little bit of oil. Once you change it out, should be good to go. Now this one on the bottom side, this is what seals the port in the bottom right there, so that you do get a good seal from valve to line assembly right there. And then lastly, in the power tube, you've got this fitting at the front, or this set screw, I should say. All this is your velocity adjuster. And all it really does inside a gun like this, or in the A5, or the X7 standard, not Phenom, is limits the volume of air that's traveling through the gun. So if you've got this screwed in, the air trying to pass through when the gun is shot, it is restricted. So not as much air can come through, lowering velocity. If you open it up, you widen the port, so you remove some of the screw out of there, more air comes through, velocity goes up. It's a very simple design on how to control air and control velocity. So it's not super tricky. It's not a crazy system where it's pushing on things and making things work. Just limits for airflow. Very, very simple. When we go to put this back in, remember that the striking side, where the hammer comes forward and strikes the valve to open it up, goes at the back of the power tube. So you want to make sure that it comes out this way. And then when we go to put it back together, well, I should say when you've got it apart, if you've taken the valve out, clean the inside of the power tube, make sure that it is free of debris or dirt. Put a little bit of, you can use grease inside of this if you wanted to, because it is a non-moving part. This doesn't slide back and forth inside of there, so it doesn't really matter. You could use oil as well. Put a little bit of oil around here, a little bit of grease around there, then drop it in, a little bit on here too, just to make sure that everything seals properly. But you do have a notch at the end, right here. There's a notch in the valve. There is a notch down inside there. It's basically right here, but at the back, you probably can't see it down in there. It's pretty dark. So you want to make sure that that goes into the notch. And basically, if you just make sure that it all goes together like that, so that this hole is directly coming out of that port, you should be good. If it doesn't, you go to slide it together and it doesn't go all the way down and this keeps getting stuck about this position. That's because you don't have that, where is it? Which finger is it? That one right there. You don't have that little port lined up properly. Let's go ahead and put this back together. See, I tried to slide it in there. You can see how that's slightly off center right there. Try to move that over. There we go. Perfect. All good. All right, so once we've reassembled this or cleaned it and greased it, whatever we're going to do, we can just drop it back in here. There is a little tab at the top that you can see right here as well. Right behind my fingernail, or right in front of my fingernail. That is kind of the limiting notch. So when you put this in, you can just rotate it until you feel it hit that notch. and that will tell you exactly where this needs to sit inside there. That makes sure that the output or the input hole on the valve is completely lined up straight down and that everything is in the proper spot right there. The bolt, this is your actual bolt. It rides on the front nozzle of the power tube. There is one O-ring on here. Check it, clean it, replace it if need be. A little bit of oil on there is okay too. And that just goes right on there. Very, very simple. Ball detent goes right down in here. These you will need to replace, not regularly, but once they stop doing their job, then you will need to replace it. The way it works is that it sits in here like that. When a ball rolls in like this, you can see that the lip or the arm of the detent cradles one ball right in this section right here, and it does not let it roll past in this direction. What will happen though over time is when you leave your gun in the uncocked position, that means the bolt is forward, the hammer is forward, driven forward by the spring, and it's just resting like it would be in your gear bag or in between times you go play, whenever it happens to be, it's going to be forward like this. All right, and you can see that the detent is compressed. Now, sitting like this over time, when you bring this thing off this way, this will just stay compressed down like this. And your gun will potentially double feed, you'll chop paint, you'll have all sorts of issues. So that's just normal. It's just one monster or one aspect of this gun is that these can wear out. Now you could say, well, I can just leave my gun cocked back. Well, that's, I would say, probably a worse decision, because if you leave this cocked back, that means you leave your mainspring compressed, which over time again could draw some of the potential energy out of your mainspring, making your gun not cycle properly or shoot at velocity. So that is not, I would go with replacing this couple buck part rather than ruining my mainspring and making my gun not work. So easy decision right there. All right, so let's continue putting the gun back together. All right, so the next part we're going to look at is going to be the linkage arm, coming back to the hammer, and the main springs, putting them back in there, the two different springs. So we have kind of a different setup now. If you do not have the ACT version, this will look slightly different. You will not have this spring in there at all, and this back cap might have less holes in it. It definitely won't have this upper hole up there. It might just have them in a complete circle. The way this works is pretty clever. We're going to set this in here like that. We're going to make sure that this little piece here, which does have a rounded end to it, we want to make sure that these two pieces, when they are together, that they marry together properly. We don't want them up, I guess, like that, so that they don't fit together properly. This one is rounded so that it does slide over the arm or around the arm and sit flush against it. So we want to make sure that that sits that way. So first thing is going to be to hook our linkage up to our bolt. Make sure that it goes through. Well, we'll do that after we put it into the hammer assembly. So we'll do this up top like this. We will make sure that we catch the linkage in the right spot to the hammer. If you look in the hammer, you can see that the front of the hammer has a little hole, and then behind it is a long slot. We want to make sure that the linkage arm goes into the slot area and not the hole area right there, if you want your ACT to function properly. If you put it into the hole, you will eliminate the ACT feature. You'll just make the hammer and the bolt move together as one unit. If you put it in the slot, that will give it the ability to slide back and forth, which is what the ACT feature is for. So we'll put it in there. As you can see, it's not in the slot or in the hole. It's in the slot. We're going to take our, where'd it go? Did I lose it? I did somewhere. There it is. It's hiding from me. We'll put that in. We'll put that in. And then we'll make sure that those two pieces go together properly just by rotating that around. And once it is, then we can just set it down inside here. Just like that. All right, so now that is lined up perfectly. We've got everything in the area that we need it to be. We're going to take our ACT spring, and on one side you have a longer spring, and on the back side you have a shorter spring. We're going to put the longer side spring in first, and then we're going to take our main spring, which has our guide nail that does need to go in just like that. This little washer just sits around it, and it is loose, and that is okay. If you see it through the window of your gun, just a floppy washer inside there, that is okay. This is just a bumper to protect the back of the gun or the hammer from smacking into the back right here. It's just a little bumper. We do want to put our handle in first. So we're going to drop our handle in. You see how it's got a hole in it right there? So when this drops through, the spring is going to come in through the backside and go through the hole in the handle so that it keeps the handle in place. Then we'll put our cap in. So the drive nail is going to fit in the middle hole. The ACT spring assembly is going to go into the top hole. And like I said earlier, if you don't have the ACT, that part is not going to be there. Don't worry about it. And then we can drop that right down into place. All right, so ACT feature, how does it work? I'm going to try to hold this and demonstrate at the same time so everything doesn't come shooting out. So when the gun cocks back, like that, it opens up the path at the front right here so that the ball can drop in, right? Let's just say that this starts to move forward and it encounters the ball. The ball has not fully come into the gun yet, and you are going to crush that ball. Now, I think, by the way I'm feeling this right here, is we don't have this in the right spot. We don't. We had it in that little hole and not in the slot right there. So we're going to try again, because I could feel that it wasn't doing it properly just by how the bolt was moving. And I'm going to keep that out of there for now. Put that back in. And then compress that back down in there. All right. Take two. So when this slides back, opens up, it slipped out of there again. I'm going to have to hold the linkage arm at the same time. Or maybe I can just do it like this without having to try to demonstrate it for you. So let's just say it opens up this way, right? Comes back, opens up right there. And as it starts to travel back forward, the hammer is coming through, right? It's trying to come in and slam against the valve that's inside here. But the bolt has hit a ball. And we don't want the bolt to just crush through the ball with the hammer. So what this ACT will let it do is it will let the hammer slide forward and go into the valve and open the valve up, but this can stay in the same spot. So as the hammer moves forward, the linkage arm just compresses the upper spring and doesn't move. And the hammer can move independent of the bolt assembly itself. So it really makes it work. It works really well for not chopping paint right there. It's a pretty slick little system inside of there. So let's try to put this on. And I can maybe just move it without cocking the gun back. Yeah, see how that can move without the hammer? Basically, that's what it does. This will stay back this way, and the hammer will slide forward without making the bolt crush the ball. So, pretty cool. All right, so let's finish up here. Let's get this back in place. So we want to be able to have this loose enough where we can drop it in. Make sure that that fits flat in there. See, that's not quite enough space right there, so we're going to come up a little bit further. And then put that in. And make sure that the cup So the gold part right there fits around the receiving side of the cup in the valve assembly right there. And you'll feel it. It kind of just drops right into place. Once it does that, then we can put the front back on. Now, the nice thing about this setup here is we can put the front of the gun on and still work in the back of the gun without assembling it yet. So it really is quite handy. I do want to put a couple other things in here. I think actually, I just want to see how that sits right there and make sure I can get to all the other goodies inside of here without having to change anything. Seems fine. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll put the front on. And again, we have not tightened down the valve yet. Everything in there, didn't lose anything. Perfect. Ooh, you know what? I did forget something. Forgot the little foregrip. That's going to just sit right in there like that. And there's a longer screw. This one down here is really long to fit over that. All right, let's just tighten this one down. This one too. Just enough to hold it in place. I can let go. Now what I can do is I can tighten this up. Now because that big block that we saw earlier inside there can't move, it's being held in place by the body, we can just turn this bottom and it's pushing up against the valve assembly. And then we can just snug it up. We don't need to crank it and crush it. We just need to snug it up against there and it will seal up just fine. All right, so now we've got pretty much everything the way we want it inside here. We've got our cap in, and then if we wanted to put a stock on there or something like that, we would pull this cap out and drop a stock in there, making sure that, you know, all the springs go in the right way. Okay, safety. Let's put our safety in there. Let's get our trigger. Drop our trigger in. And all these parts, when you've got them out, if you're going through the I want to call it the hassle, but if you're going through the work to take this whole thing apart like this, just clean everything when you're in there. You've got your trigger out, wipe it down. You've got all your parts out, wipe them down. You might as well. And just put a little bit of light oil on things that move. You're not going to hurt anything. Don't overdo it. Don't grease a lot of stuff. The only thing that I would say put grease on is when you put the valve back in. That's it. Everything else, just put a light coat of oil on there. Any kind of paintball oil will work just fine. Let's put our sear back in there, our sear spring. Push it down in. Now the sear spring, just sitting as it is right now, is under load. So be very careful with what you touch when it's sitting like this, because this spring, if you just adjust this slightly, that spring can pop out of there and you'll, trust me, you'll lose it. Trying to find these things, they'll shoot 20 feet away and you'll never know where they went. So just be careful with it. It does help that it's green, but doesn't mean you won't find it. So we've got our trigger guard in, everything's in. We can put everything kind of back down on there. If you've spent the time to kind of line it up as you should, you can just drop everything right down on and it should, say should, go right back to place. If you put it all together and your halves don't want to line up, there's a big gap and it won't go together, don't force it, don't push it, pull the half off again, reline everything up, reset everything that's inside of there, and try again. It only takes a couple minutes. It can be frustrating, but it will actually keep you from breaking things, which is what we're trying to do here. Tighten that down, and then we just want to make sure that everything works. So cock the gun back, pull the trigger, cock the gun back, put the safety on, pull the trigger. Perfect, doesn't work. Excellent. Exactly how we want it to be. We can go ahead and put this back in. And since we didn't have to monkey around with the spring and latch system up there, it goes right together. Barrel on. And we're ready to go. So maintenance inside the 98 Custom is very, very simple, very straightforward. There's a couple extra pieces when you have an ACT version, but it's not hard to function, not hard to deal with, not hard to work on. Just give yourself the time to do the work. Everything will be better, or easier, I should say. And then wipe it down on the outside and you're ready to go. Well guys, I hope this helps you out with any questions or concerns you have about your paintball gear or products. And as always, for all your paintball needs, shop ansgear.com.